Hello, everyone, and welcome to day two to our RevEx Fest, the Revenue Excellence Festival for Modern Sales Pros. For those who are new here, hi, welcome. And for those who are just coming back, welcome back. Today's event is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who are not familiar with MSP, we are the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operation, and enablement, aka our modern sales pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer the toughest revenue questions out there. So if you're not a member yet, you'll be invited to join right after Summit. Now, on to our amazing sponsors. This summit would not be made possible without our amazing sponsors that you see on this slide. So big thanks to them for making RevEx happen. To learn more about these innovative companies, click on the sponsor booth tab at the top of the event page. We also have a jam-packed agenda for this week, so definitely check out our agenda, also located at the top-hand corner. You'll be able to access all the different contents and speakers that we have lined up for the rest of the week. Now on to the agenda for today's session. I'll go over some housekeeping notes quickly, and then I'll pass it off to our speakers to do their introduction before diving into the content, and we'll have some live Q&A available, and then we'll wrap things up with a wrap-up and key takeaways. So first and foremost, familiarize yourself with Goldcast. We have the agenda, the sponsor tab, the Q&A tab, and the chat tab. So please leverage all those links while you're here. Make some friends, chat in the chat drops, say where you're calling from. We love to know where our MSP community is calling from, and definitely ask our questions for our awesome speakers here today. And don't worry, this event is being recorded, so if you want to rewatch some of the content, you'll be able to access the recording and key takeaways right after this event. Now on to our amazing speakers for our fireside chat today, a culture of success and on NRR, NPS, CSMs, and more with the father of success with Pete Kazanji, co-founder and CEO of Atrium, and Nick Mehta, CEO of Gainsight. I'll pass it off to Pete for introductions, and I'll come back for wrap-up. Pete, after you.
Pete, awesome being here. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
I am super pumped to see you. I feel that like everyone has to be in a good mood when they see the artwork that you have behind you. Who is that fine gentleman?
Well, he is a very fine gentleman. He's on a very fine sports team. I mean, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so I'm a huge Steeler fan. And this is TJ Watt, who's a game-wrecking linebacker. Unfortunately, he's out for a few weeks, so I have to survive. But yeah, I love my Steelers, and I love my customer success too. So we'll talk about both of those.
That's right, man. Awesome. So we'll do a couple intros here before we get into some of these kind of the discussion questions. But I'm super excited to be hanging out with like the godfather of CX, the uncle of CX. I don't know. Yeah.
I like those better.
Cheerleader.
Somebody called me. I like all those. I take all those. Somebody called me the grandfather of CS, and I was like, yeah, that's it's a little close. I turned 45. That's a little too close. But I like Godfather. I like cheerleader. That's really what I think the role is. So
oh my God, man, your jacket and your shoes at Pulse. Oh my gosh, they were just absolutely fantastic. So I'm super pumped to talk about CX, and also, I mean, but like obviously this is Modern Sales Pros, and we got the S word in there. But I think the reality is that whatever everyone's kind of realizing that like all it is, there's just a loop, right? It's like it's a loop. Winning by Design talks about it as like a bow tie, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm super pumped to talk about success and how it impacts revenue. Let's do a couple intros here first. Mr. Nick, you want to go first? I mean, I feel that if people don't know you, they've been like living under a rock. But like we might as well, you might as well give us the TLDR on who you are and what you spend your time doing, kind of what you did before.
Yeah, totally. So okay, how do I spend my time? That's probably the most ridiculous combination of SaaS, customer success, listening to Taylor Swift, making fake rap videos about customer success. my time spending is probably the most bizarre thing, and we can talk more about that. But the background is I professionally, I started my career in enterprise software. Actually, I started way back when doing a consumer startup, but we'll talk about that's a different podcast. We can talk about
over
that.
beers. Yeah, I was gonna say another crying into our beers another time.
I did, but I worked in enterprise, and I was kind of in that on-premise software world, right? I was a product manager, and then I was a GM of a business in a larger software company, and that was all those old days. And by the way, some of you are like, you probably hear the term on-premise software, you don't understand what the heck that is. Basically, we would sell stuff, people would buy it, they'd pay it up front, they weren't paying us on an ongoing basis. So frankly, we could sell to them and then move on to the next customer. And that was sort of where I think sales
later,
right?
Hope you have fun.
Good luck with that. Yeah, call me if you need anything, right? And then I went to run my first SaaS company where the customer was paying us on a monthly annual basis. And I was like, oh, whoa, you can't just sell and walk away because they'll just leave. And I was like, oh, it was an earth-shattering yet so obvious observation to me as a CEO. And I spent a lot of time in that company. This was a company called Live Office on customer success. We didn't actually call it that. We just called it client services, but retention, adoption, advocacy. I was like knee deep in it. And we sold the company. It was a good exit. And I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. I was spending some time with some VCs and all that. And I was like, God, this problem is an unsolved problem. And all these new SaaS companies are going to come about and they're going to have the same problem. And maybe it'll happen in other industries. And it turned out a couple other guys were working on the same idea. And so we got hooked up kind of an arranged date by battery
y'all should talk.
Yeah, exactly. You should talk like a chaperoned kind of date.
Here's a bottle of wine.
Totally. So we Jim Eberlin, Sridhar Pettineni, and then I kind of got connected to them, and then we launched Gainsight in 2013. And I think most of you know, but for folks that don't, our original mission was really about how in SaaS, customer success is going to become a new critical discipline. And we really wanted to enable companies to do customer success. Now we build software to help make that, scalable and measurable and all that. But our mission, I think similar to you, Pete, was not just about the software. It was really about the profession and this new discipline and doing it well.
Yep.
And over time, one of the things that's interesting, and this ties to, I think, what we're going to talk about, is what we figured out is customer success isn't just about saving customers or churn or retention. It's really about part of your growth strategy. Go back to the bow tie or the loop or whatever infinity diagram, whatever diagram you make. Customer success is part of your growth strategy. So what we're talking about at Gainsight now is if you want to be an efficient business with the rule of 40 and you want to go public or have a good exit, you have to have a durable growth strategy. It can't just be about spending a ton of money on SEM and hiring a bunch of reps and then churning and burning. You've got to have something that's durable. We think durable growth is about how do we keep and grow our existing customers and sell more to them. It's about how do we get our customers to be big advocates. It's about how do we make our product a great sales tool, so product-led growth. And we've actually expanded now our product footprint. So we're in the community business, we're in the product analytic business, but it's all around this idea of how do you build durable growth, which is why I was super honored to be here, because I feel like the modern sales pros are working on durable growth in their businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that durable growth. That's going to be like that's going to be like the new hotness, right? The new brand. It's like Dan Scheinman is pretty famous. Angel investor in Zoom, and Speckett, a number of others as well. He was talking about what was it, like gap or growth at any price versus versus growth at a reasonable expense or something like that. But I like the phrasing of durability. Awesome. Well, I'm super pumped to talk more. Just for folks who don't know me, I'm Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. Atrium makes data-driven sales management software. We exist to help sales managers, leaders, and reps use metrics to improve the performance of their teams. I guess maybe you could call us like customer success software for sales organizations, right? To help their teams, perform better through analytics. Prior to Atrium, I started a software company called TalentBin. It was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. I wrote a book on sales on startup sales called Founding Sales as well, and of course I started Modern Sales Pros. So that's a little bit on me.
By the way, I'm gonna shamelessly interrupt you and just tell you, and I haven't told you this, but you probably know that I was talking to one of our sales leaders, and we started using Atrium, and they love it. And he said it's like Gainsight, but for sales management. And I was like, oh, So they love
I've
it.
never used that. That's so funny. I've never used that like analog before, and that's crazy. Yeah, I want to talk about the gains. Like you guys call them gainsters, right?
Gangsters,
Like,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I want to talk about gangsters in a second here because they're very special people. But like, yeah, your corporate culture is anyway. I want to talk about that at the end because I want to talk about CS stuff first. But like, yeah, just like everyone's lovely. I don't get it.
Thank you.
It's amazing. So I think like here's the thing. Everyone kind of like gets it now that like success is so important. Maybe because you've been like banging the drum so damn loud for
It only took
so damn
like
loud.
100,000 tweets and like 10,000 podcasts, but maybe it's coming through now. Yeah.
No, but like, oh gosh, yeah. So yes. So I think, but there's a couple of things here. One is like when you're early, it can be lonely AF.
Super.
And like one of the jokes I like to say is like, if you're like someone's running in a direction, there's like a bunch of other people running with them. It's like, oh, that's a race, right? Like, oh, they're clearly it's important. And if like someone's like running in one direction, like nobody's running with them, it's like that person's just nuts, right?
Totally.
Like they're just bananas, right? And so now like people realize, and there's like more vendors in the space and so on and so forth, but like gee whiz, like how did you contend with being so early? And like it must have been like lonely. Like how did your organization contend with that? How do you keep your chin up? How does the sales organization contend with that? Because like our audience or like our members at Modern Sales Pros, like they're like a lot of them sell in like new categories where people don't get it. So like how did you guys contend with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think part of it was naivete that we just started on it without thinking through. And so we didn't realize what was going to happen. So just to give you a little more background, in 2013, we launched Gainsight. And we basically, back then, if you kind of looked around and went on LinkedIn, maybe there's like 1,000 CSMs in the world. And I don't mean 1,000 companies with CS teams. I mean 1,000 people. So
Are you serious?
Now, luckily, we never did that search. Like we never did that search back.
Yeah.
We would never done the company.
I bet it would have been in the thousands. Yeah,
maybe a couple,
but not tens of thousands.
Salesforce had a few hundred, and Workday had a 50, and it was very small. And so one of the things that was interesting was luckily we didn't know that. But now it's now it's like 300,000, 400. It's a huge, right? But one of the things that happened, and I think this happens when something is small, and we've all been through probably in your lives things like this. When you have a small group, it's actually kind of bonding, right? And so you're lonely amongst others, but when you're together, it's amazing. And so one of the things that kept us going and still keeps me going is this Pulse community, and that we are Pulse community similar to MSP, and I think it's the community of customer success professionals. We do big events every year and all that. And we always made the community not about Gainsight. It wasn't about Gainsight. I don't get on stage and talk about, oh, here's all the product stuff. It's like literally about them. And one of the things that was interesting was they felt lonely too, right? So in 2013, you're like a CSM in a company, or maybe you were called services and now you're moving to CS, and they would come to our events. And I would always ask them after the event, say, hey, how was the event? What was the best thing about it? And, I always expect to hear, oh, this session, or maybe they'd say how awesome my keynote was. They never said any of that. What they always said was, I feel like I'm not alone. Because I'm amongst people, right? And so one of the things that's interesting, and you talked about being the cheerleader of the category, my people are the customer success profession. I feel honored to be amongst them. And so that's one of the things that I think helped us a lot in feeling less lonely. Was it wasn't like there was Gainsight and the Pulse community. We were like this one blended organism together. And we feel even to this day. And, I've had, over the years, I've done thousands of calls with like CS leaders on career advice and like, and making those. And it goes way beyond like just like the work of like our software and selling it. So that was one thing that helped a lot. And then the other thing that we can come back to was obviously when you have a new thing, your culture internally matters too, because that bonds you together and helps you get through that. But it's definitely lonely. I'll tell you a fun anecdote just to we'll put a dot on this and move on to the next question, which is, like it's lonely and it's like sometimes maddening and you're like, are you doing the right thing? And I'd be lying if I said we knew the whole way it was all going to work out. Tons of moments of doubt and all that. The one that was early on though was pretty interesting is like we got our first like legit office, like moving from a co-working space into this little office in 2013. And
nice.
3,000 square feet, 2-year lease, like that looked like a huge space, and we didn't think we could ever fill it, right? Like, and I was like, oh, are we gonna even be in business at the end of this, right? Now, in hindsight, that's obviously very tiny, but when I walked in, I was like, this is so big. Are we gonna ever be able to fill this? Are we gonna survive through the end of the lease? And then so this is like March of 2013. Okay, so that
Yeah.
our Q2 started in April. Started in May. Okay, so May, June, July, because we're one month offset. And it was just like big open, like office above a bar, 3,000 square feet, all open. Everyone's just
above a bar. I
literally
love
above
it.
a bar.
Trouble.
And we're in Q2, and literally the entire quarter, we didn't close one deal, not one, 0 deals. And so you're sitting there in this open office, and there's nothing.
Silent.
No phone, silence, which in sales is terrible.
It's very inspiring. Yeah.
And so we had a lot of those moments, as I'm sure many of you watching have had in your companies.
Yeah, so I think the takeaways, and like this totally jives with like our experience at Atrium, and like I would be lying if if I didn't say that like I was in what we do with like modern sales pros and some of the stuff that we do with our customers and what have you, if it wasn't inspired by some of the stuff that you've done, you guys have done. Like one of the things that we talk about is like when you're creating a new category, you really have to identify these people who like get it early on, because like you got the whole world, and we're trying to do like scaled like inception, and like we're like bringing like we all live in the future, and we're trying to bring everybody else into the future. So when you find other people already in the future with you, you got to like bear hug the heck out of them.
100%.
And so one of the things, like we have a couple of different like mantras internally that we use to kind of refer to this. We talk about how you get all of Atrium, right? It's not, you don't just get the product, right? Yep. You need to like, you want to talk about like a compensation plan thing, and like do some with like Pete just for funsies. Like, okay, cool. Like, no problem. Let's go. Right. Or like, someone's got a problem with their CR, like, their lead routing or whatever. And like, they need, and like our CSM's like, oh, okay, cool. Like, well, like, we use like, I can help you with it, even though it's like, very tangential to Atrium. So like, we call it all of Atrium. You get all of Atrium. And then the second thing is we talk about like the lifetime value of the human, not the lifetime value of the account, but the lifetime value of like the person, right? Because they're going to go from place to place to place to place. And this is something that like I noticed you guys did an amazing job of early on, like, because I've been following Nick on Twitter for like, I don't know, like 50 years or whatever. and so the like essentially like helping people get their next job, stoking them out. And like, I mean, it's kind of amazing because as a vendor, you have line of sight into like the relative quality of like execution of like people. It's kind of crazy. Like you get really like all the tea, right? Like all the tea. Yeah. And so when we find people, this is what I tell my staff all the time, is like when you find people who really get it, whether it's talking about like someone who's like, a modern customer success leader, or someone who's like a really data-driven sales manager or leader, or like really, and like think about any like new category of software there, like with SalesLoft and Outreach and other sales engagement solutions, it's like, wow, this is a really forward-thinking sales development leader, et cetera. Like I want to put my arms around them and like make them famous and help them be successful. And so I think that's like, those are good like takeaways for anybody who's like kind of dealing with like creating a category. Let's talk a little bit.
Those are so spot on. I love the way you just summarize that, of like all of Atrium and the lifetime value of a human. I 100% agree on those. And I think that's like something a lot of vendors and companies miss out on the opportunity, is like on the all of Atrium side. It's like, the same thing with us. We do tons of calls where somebody's like, hey, I want to input on CSM compensation. Great. Like and you kind of have to have a philosophy. One of the things you have to do, which I see in you as well, is you can't be transactional. You can't be like, how is this going to help me close a deal right now? That's never going to work. So one of the things I think of the philosophy wise, if you want to create a new category, you cannot be transactional. You can't be like, I won't do anything unless it helps me right now. That philosophy might work in a more mature business. I don't know. It won't work at all in category creation.
Yeah, you gotta put it out into the market. Like Kyle Porter does an amazing job of this at SalesLoft, and I think it was like Zig Ziglar who said like, you'll get everything you want in the world. All you have to do is give everybody else what they need.
Oh, right? I love that.
I think it's Zig Ziglar. I don't know. I think Kyle taught me that. Okay, so let's talk about community. You talked a little bit about Pulse and how you guys like generate a community there. That's an event,
Right.
right? Or at least one component is an
Started
event.
as an event. Yep. Yep.
What are the other kind of like things that you did in order to like facilitate community, to like bring these people together, to help them understand that they're not alone, and kind of like create that electron cloud circling around Gainsight?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, it's funny because I think this is the mega trend right now, right? Because you
Sure.
probably hear a lot about community-led growth.
Yep.
HubSpot's talking about at their conference that that's a big topic in general.
Hmm.
And so when I think of community and category creation, they're like this. They can't. Those are like they're directly intertwined. You can't do
That's a
one
good
without.
point.
Yeah. And so community for me is you have to start out with this idea that community is not just an event, right? And so now an event is a great way to make it a real thing, but a
Yep.
community exists like in the ether, right? It's just like are there people that can call other people up and get advice? And do they feel like less alone because of that? And they feel connection and bonding. And so
Yep.
one of the things I can't say we thought about this all up front, but kind of after the fact, if
Well,
we
you
look at
learned as you went. Yeah.
learning to go. And we said, oh, we're going to do an event, Pulse, right? But one of the things we did was we said we're not going to make it about Gainsight. So the topics are going to be all about CSM compensation and org
Exactly.
structure, blah blah blah. And so that was one thing that I think helped a lot is when you do events, you make them about the customer and their life, not about your product, right? So that's kind of one thing that I think is really transferable. The second thing though is you can constantly tweak your event strategy to create more connection, right? So obviously when you're doing a big event, that turns into like lots of time for breaks and connection. But we do a second kind of series of events called Chief Customer Officer Summit. And that's kind of more for your leaders, the top, 100, 200 leaders. And that one of the things that's interesting, what we did, we started in 2015, was we said, we're going to put them in a nice room in some fancy place for a day and a half. And literally besides a maybe 30-minute kickoff, there's no content. And all we do is we bring in professional facilitators and they basically help get connected to each other, break them into groups of 6 or 8, but based on kind of company size. And they just talk about org structure, aligning to sales, getting budget from finance, all the things that you deal with, right? And so one of the things we really tried to do in our events then is create this spirit of like, it's about the connection, and actually whenever I do my intro at Pulse, I always say like the most important thing at Pulse is not the content of speakers. It's like what happens in the hallways and how you get connected, right? And so we did the Pulse thing, we did the leadership thing, we did all kinds of other smaller things, right? We do every month, my chief customer officer, Kelly Capote, and I host like a new chief customer virtual happy hour where we send everyone like ice cream or wine, and we get them. These are people that just got promoted, and you bring them together, and like, okay, they're all going through the same stuff. Like, for example, how do you drive change quickly in the org? How do you make changes in your org structure? How do you get aligned to the other functional leaders, right? And it's incredible because we've done this for so long, and yet like people love it, they eat it up. And so these really small group, whether it's a dinner or it's a kind of a virtual thing. And one of the things we're huge on is really being active facilitators. So one conversation, and not like kind of Jeffersonian. So one conversation, icebreaker questions to get people to open up more on the personal side, make sure everyone gets a chance to talk. And so this community building can happen in a 5,000 person conference, and it can happen at a 10-person dinner. And so over the years, we've done all of that, then taking it to different cities and regions and stuff like that, and constantly working on more. And then last thing is, obviously you can do some online too. And so actually some folks may know we bought a company that does community software called Insighted. And the reason we bought it is we were using it as our like online community platform. And that's interesting too. That attracts a different kind of person. You're not going to get the CRO or the CCO to be super active in online forum. But, in our world, who became that community? The CS ops professional, right?
Oh,
the CS
fully.
ops professional is critical to us. They're the ones who are going to gain Gainsight. And so we created this like the world's largest CS ops community. And I have a person named Seth Wiley who runs that community, and he does like online stuff and virtual stuff and in person. Yeah. So it's huge in the DNA of Gainsight.
I love it. Yeah. I think the thing that you kind of opened with, which I think is, maybe it's obvious to you, but maybe wasn't obvious to me, is that like community is central to new category creation. I think the reason why, and when we started modern sales pros, it's because like the traditional arc is like you have a vendor. Like I used to work at VMware way back in the day, right? You got a vendor and they have like some tool that's like particularly rad and like, gets to scale or whatever, whether it's like, VMware ESX or like Oracle database or SAP, blah, blah, blah. All right. And then eventually like it's like, oh, okay, well, this vendor conference then becomes the center of gravity that then becomes like an industry conference or whatever. And so it's almost kind of like, it's like kind of community by like inductive argument, as opposed to just being like, hey, look, here are these humans who like have these needs and they have a cloud of needs, right? Like they've got all like, all manner of problems. And to the extent that we can aggregate them together, we solve one of those needs, or maybe a couple of those needs. Like we solve one of those needs, but what we're going to do is we're going to be situated in the middle.
That's exactly
of that.
And exactly. And Pete, you take that further. You start out with one of those needs, and then you're like, well, we can solve more over time. It's kind of what we've been doing, probably what you'll do over time too, right? It's like you start in this one area and then you can do more. So it creates a lot of scalability in your business.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. And I think the thing that a lot of folks can kind of get like wrapped around the axle on is like thinking about like how they want to like make it like we are the community of, and it's like a task.
Yes.
Right? Like say you're in like the demo automation space, which is like a really hot space right now, right? You're like, oh, well, like we're the community on how to be rad at demos. It's like, that's actually like not the thing that like no one cares about like the community being rad at demos. You care about being the community of like sales engineers.
Totally.
Right?
Like the or sales collective is an example of that, right? Yeah, totally.
Yeah, or like product marketers or whatever. And so it's really more about like the cloud of humans.
That's exactly right.
Than it is about like a specific task that needs to be done. And I think the online thing is really kind of fascinating as well, because I hadn't thought about it being like the different human types, or kind of like, I guess, subgenres. But like, I mean, we see this in MSP quite a bit, right? Because like we have this Google group that is just like really powerful for Q&A. Like the MSP events, like the salons that we do that are like roundtable, it's more about like, it's networking, but also like emoting, right? Like it's like we call it, we kind of joke about it. We call it like, sales stitch and bitch, where you like, you hang out, and like, because people want to like, people have tough jobs and they want to like, kvetch about it and like get empathy and also it's like high frequency learning as well. But then there's also a need for like asynchronous learning as well. Like, hey, what's the best way of like, contending with like pipe hygiene problems or whatever? Oh, well, you should put like this reporting together and you should like, do this around like this operating rhythm, blah, blah, blah. Right. Like those sort of very tactical kind of like Stack Overflow-y type questions. That's the sort of thing that like having a compelling online community can really help with. One thing you kind of had mentioned earlier on the topic of making sure like how you like persist when you're early and it's tough. One thing you said like, hey, it's got to be community, right? Like you got to like pull your people together and like, kind of like bring other people onto and like, stuff them onto the snowball rolling downhill. But also you talked about like organizational culture and corporate culture as well. And like I've been lucky enough to work with like a lot of gangsters, like Brian Hamlin was is a customer of ours over at Sisu, Bill Hu over at Clearbit. Obviously, like I've had the opportunity to spend time with Jim, who's at Gainsight right now, and Jeff, who's at Gainsight. I'm sure if I went and like looked in my first degree connections, it would be like bananas, because you guys have like a crazy sales diaspora and kind of coaching tree. So I've been blessed to interact with these, and like every time I'm like, oh man, it's like opening up like a little like Easter egg, and I'm just like, wow, it's always like full of something delicious and like lovely. Where does that come? And so I imagine that's also the case across the rest of your organization. Where does that come from, and how did that like help power you guys through that kind of like early lonely period to kind of like where you guys are right now, sitting on top of the industry?
Yeah, and thank you so much for saying that. Nothing makes me prouder or happier than hearing that. So all those people you listed are amazing, and so I think one of the things that we did early on was we said, okay, intentionally we're gonna be a very values first organization. And by the way, we're not the first people to do that. Salesforce, lots of other. on that. And so in the very beginning, and Pete, you might have done this too, we just said, here's our values, like literally when we had nobody, almost nobody in the company. And so they were golden rule, treat people the way they want to be treated, childlike joy, bring the kid in you to work every day, success for all, which means drive success for all of our stakeholders, customers, employees, investors, our communities, our families, Shoshin, which is the Japanese word for beginner's mind, and then stay
Oh,
thirsty.
I love that.
Yeah. And then stay thirsty, my friends, which is all about, well, it's copied from that commercial, but it's all about, ambition and drive. And so anyways, we had these values and they really, really kind of were who we were. And it wasn't like the classic stereotypical company where they're on the wall or they're in the all hands, but nobody lives them. It was like to this day, you could go to Hyderabad, India, and Tel Aviv, where we have an office. You could go to Amsterdam. Everyone's talking about them all the time, like literally, and they're just part of the culture and everything we do. And even when we do planning, we talk about the values. And so it sort of became very deep. But then one of the things that happened is we said, okay, there's an idea that's embodied inside these values that's bigger than just those words. And so 2016, we were working on what's our purpose of our company. Like if you kind of boil that all down. And one of the things that happened is like, and this, I guess probably came from me to some extent, where I said, look, I'm not like, it's awesome to, be able to make money or build a big company or go public. Those would be super cool things. I would totally love that. That'd be amazing, right? I love SaaS. I love customer success, but that wasn't really the thing. Like that wasn't the thing that got me going. And I think part of it was that as a kid, I was super lonely. People that like knew me as a kid versus now, it's like a night and day. I was just like chubby, lonely, like just didn't, very bad fashion, unathletic. And I just didn't fit in. And so this idea of like human connection and like kind of being human, it really just was, it's like a deep desire of mine. It's sort of like all this stuff you carry from childhood. And so one of the things we said was, look, there's a lot of business kind of leaders out there and role models where if you really boil it down, the lesson from a lot of leaders is the way to be successful is to be less human, to be more tough and brutal and not be emotional and not worry about people's feelings, not worry about people. And by the way, that playbook works great. Like there's a lot of people made a lot of money on that. But what we've said at Gainsight was we're like, hey, if we can make a tiny, tiny dent in the universe, it'd be to prove that you can win a different way. And so what we said, our purpose statement was to be living proof you can win in business while being human first. And the idea is while thinking about all the people around you as human beings first, whether it's a customer that just came on board, that's kind of easy. But what about the customer that just churned you? What about the customer that just churned you? And like an example, a year and a half ago, where a customer churned us and then she got laid off and then she called me for job advice a month later. I'm like, yeah, sure, we'll help. You're a human being. Of course, it's easy to be human about the new employee, but what about the employee that just left the company? Of course, like I stay in touch with all the people you listed. Like I stay in touch with hundreds of Gainsters and I do anything for them to move, whether they work in our company or not. And it's about like, it's about humanizing everyone around you, your investors, right? Our investors aren't like, evil or out to get people. Like a lot of people have these stereotypes. They're just humans too, right? They may have a slightly nicer vacation home or a slightly bigger, jet or whatever, but they're just humans too. And like even your competitors, right? You have competitors and they're not like, so one of the things we try to do at Gainsight is really have that human first idea, which by the way, one of the things it does is it says human beings don't stay at companies forever. So I'm completely comfortable. People come to Gainsight and then they go do other things. And I'm totally supportive of that. And so that human idea, which by the way, I think a lot of other companies struggle with that became the thing that motivated us. And that became the thing that like is, human first. That's like literally everywhere in Gainsight. And then it turns into like lots of practical things about, how you treat people and how do you handle a situation and all that. So that's sort of what motivates us.
Yeah, I love it. And I feel that feels very communitarian.
Very tied to community.
Right?
Yeah. It's kind of weird because human first and community and customer success are all tied to similar stuff, right? Customer success, part of it, like you have a customer, they have a job, they're just trying to do their job and you're trying to do your job and you want both people to win, right? Customer success, a big part of it is seeing that customer as a human being, right? And community is about the human desire for connection and not feeling alone and belonging. And so, yeah, it's all like this muddy, messy soup together. So, yeah.
But it's funny. I was trying to think of like how I would, this is the nerdiest sentence ever. Yeah. Get ready. I was trying to think about how I would model this like in SQL, nice. as you were describing it. I can't believe I just said that aloud. But I think I'm like, actually, I think it's all just in the same table and they're different types. And what I mean by that is like like lots of our customers want to come work at Atrium,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is I imagine it's like, which is a really good sign of like product market fit, because we get all these like sales managers, sales leaders who are like, hey, if you're ever hiring like another sales manager, we get like sales operations people being like, hey, I want to, like, I'd love to come be a CSM over there. And then on the flip side, like we've had people who like our CSMs become extraordinarily good, our AEs too become extraordinarily good at like data-driven sales management, using math to kind of like to improve performance, because that's what they do all day long. Is like our AE, like we have a product-led motion, it's a sales assist motion, it takes like 5 minutes to turn on Atrium, and so our AEs like act as, you know, what we call them sales strategy advisors during the top of funnel, or like kind of the mid funnel process, and then our success folks like kind of act as like, you know, sales operations / enablement, like, you know, coaches, data driven, right? But what they do is they get these muscles, right? And so it's like unsurprising that then some folks like then go off to other places to like then use their muscles over there, because an organization can only grow so fast, and if humans grow faster than the organization, then like, you know, you want them to be successful and like use these no missile, but then they go and they buy Atrium over there, right? And so I think like, and so it's just like, you know, employee goes to customer, goes to like, you know, they churn, they're a non-customer, but then they go over here, or sorry, they like, we're starting to see this right now where we see people who like, you know, a user who is like, you know, a rabid user, and the organization churned for whatever reason, like for other reason, but they were unhappy about it. Then they land over here in like in a live customer, and it's like, oh, welcome back, right? Or anyway, so like I think that
it's what you said, lifetime value of the human. I mean, that's what you're talking about, and I totally agree. It's one table. You know, we have people that have come
one table. God, we're
I like
nerds.
select star where values equals human first or whatever. Yeah, we lost half the audience at this point. But this, like, we have people that have, you know, been, they were Gainside employee that went to a customer. We've, you know, customers that became Gainside employees. We've had to go back and forth multiple times. I mean, it's all great. Like, it's all, and if you're fortunate enough to be able to keep people in this community overall, it's amazing. And by the way, we're not like all this stuff that I'm talking about, like, and you're talking about, we're not the first people to do this. I mean, Salesforce, Marketo, HubSpot, like they've all of those through this like embracing of this big community that's bigger than just your company.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. Yeah, so actually that's okay, so it's like the culture, the internal culture is like an echo or like a Venn diagram overlap with like the community culture anyway, because again, it's all one table. That'll be our joke.
And you know, one thing, Pete, on that practically is, you know, we talk to our customers in our community about our values and human first, everything I talked about. And so it's interesting because they all know it and they vibe to it. And like, I think that's another thing that think about if you're creating categories, how do you have a culture that would resonate not just with your employees, but with your customers? That's important. Like, it wouldn't work. Like, if Gainsight's internal culture was, you know, win at all costs and, you know, kill the competition, and you got all these people in customer success that are super empathetic and care about, it would be like oil and water.
They'd be like, ew.
It's funny.
You're the evil empire.
100%. You know, people talk about product market fit and, you know, all that stuff. There's probably a culture community, which is like your culture aligned to your community. And I can tell that yours is in what you're trying to do. And that's really, really important.
Yeah. Yes. This is, you've obviously done a lot of thinking on this. So one of the things that I think you guys have been doing a lot of talking about recently, which I think is great, is on how CX, it can be more of like a revenue enabler, right? And I think that like use us, like we know this, right? So like, you know, I'm technically the CRO at Atrium. I'm like the founder and, you know, bottle washer, and I, you know, replace the toilet paper and all that good stuff. But like, so our CX team goes into me. Our head of CX is this wonderful woman, Bridget Seacard, who's also a big Swiftie, just FYI.
Oh, nice.
I literally slacked her earlier when you mentioned that, that you're a big Taylor Swift fan. She's a huge Taylor Swift fan. And so, but one of the things, like, we have a land and expand motion, right? So we like, we enter an organization, turn on an Atrium account, takes like 5 minutes or whatever. And oftentimes what'll happen is like, a single team or a couple of AE teams will purchase the solution initially, and then we'll move on to the SDR team, and then we'll move on to the enterprise AE team, and then we'll move on to the commercial AE team or whatever. And like, that ain't gonna happen if people aren't having success, right? Or if people are like, ew, right? Or like, yeah, or if they're like, yeah, it's fine, it's aight, right? Like if they're like, it's aight, then like you're not going to expand, right? And even if your initial land is like 15K or 25K or whatever, but the total value in the account is 100K or like 200K or what have you, it's like really important. I mean, put aside the like gross loss ARR and like the logo churn piece of it, which is obviously extremely important, but like you're not going to get to like the full actualization of the account if you don't have success. So what are the biggest things that you've seen around like CROs and people who care, or like, I mean, CROs, CFOs, people who care about like the whole revenue picture, kind of like getting more focus on CX there?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we had a conference, our Pulse conference, right? And it was in which was it, August. And in that conference, we had a lot of different speakers, and one of the I think more provocative ones was Confluent. So Erica Schultz, who is the president of Confluent, and she runs all go-to-market. So she's got sales, marketing, CS all underneath her, right? So she's got exactly what you're talking about. And we had her CCO, Roger Scott, on as well. So the two of them were on this panel, and we were talking about this idea of what does that mean to look at the holistic picture and how does CS fit in? And she came from a sales background. She was Oracle and New Relic, and
I was gonna say, I think she was at New Relic, if I recall correctly. Makes sense.
She's phenomenal. And what they talked about was there are a couple of things. Number one is she said net revenue retention is the thing that brings everyone together. And actually, funnily enough, she and Roger, like when they came on stage, they had like nice outfits, but they like opened their jackets up and they had a T-shirt that said "I love NRR," right? And she was basically like, NRR is the thing that brings the whole revenue organization together, because you can't get NRR, as you just talked about, without successful customers that then expand and so on. So one thing is, I think, philosophy and metrics. But then if you click into the next level of detail, one of the things that they've done, and I think a lot of people have done to kind of help align people, is to build a kind of this customer journey model that is all about customer maturity. And how do you help that customer continue to mature through using your product or solution, right? And I'm sure you have this in your head, Pete, or maybe you've written it down, which is like, you have a customer that's using Atrium, and then they're doing X, Y, and Z. And now it's like, okay, well, the next logical step is to do the A, B, and C, use these features. And I think the customer wants to know that, because one of the things that's interesting is kind of like if you have a personal trainer, we were talking about this before, right? Personal trainer, and part of the personal trainer's job isn't to just like ask you what you want and do that. They're recommending what to do next. They're like, okay, you want to get in shape. That's kind of a vague goal. Here's the things I think you should consider. And then, by the way, we're going to start small. We're going to start with like you being able to do, 10 push-ups. And then we're going to say, okay, now we want to start moving on to, doing burpees or whatever it is. Right. And so that's that maturity model. The customer wants it. They want to be guided. And great salespeople aren't just selling, they're guiding that customer through the maturity of getting more value for your solution. And that's what CS does too. That's why I kind of feel like when people talk about sales or CS, or that they're different, I'm like, these things are totally tied together. They're not. And I think that's important. If you have a common agreement on maturity model, it helps a lot. And so, we've done the Gainsight, a lot of companies have done that, of like, what is the model for getting more value from our product?
Yeah, I think, and because I do want to talk about like product analytics and how it impacts that, because it's very related. I think one of the things that organizations will oftentimes, like the product management function won't be sufficiently opinionated about how this product ought to be used.
Nailed it.
Like ought. I'm a big fan of the word ought. Right, like how it ought to be used, and like have an opinion about it. You're like, look, here's how this ought to be used. Now, in fairness, like that should probably be in the product development process from a PRD. Like when you're talking about like your user stories and whatever, it's like, hey, the reason why we're building this thing is so people ought to use it this specific way to solve these specific problems right here. And like, we don't want to lose that in translation as it goes through sales and success and what have you. But so then, like, I'll use Atrium as an example, right? Like we have our product is decomposed into like, there's like 6 different parts of it, and we have instrumentation on each parts of it, and like we're like our CXers are able to see like, okay, cool. Like, they're able to see how people are using it or what have you. You can like, report on it and whatever. Like, I heard there's like fancy software that allows you to do this stuff, Nick.
Exactly.
And then run plays off of it. And then the important thing though is like, but like to have like a conception of like what good looks like. Like in our case, we talk about views, right? Like you can take like Atrium's got like whatever it is, like 150, pre-baked metrics that work straight out of the box for SDR, AE, AM, CSM teams, right? Then you combine those into different types of views, right? So like, there's like dashboarding functionality, goal setting, there's alerts, alert feeds, whatever. And then like those things can be bundled into folders. Okay, great. So like there's all these different features. And then what you want to do is like, hey, a really healthy customer will have, or like really healthy user will have this many views that they own at like day 60. At day 60, they'll have this many views and this many folders. And so what that should probably like drop out to is like this many days active and then trailing 30 days and this many page views, right? And just have an opinion around it. And like that's day 60. Okay, well, what about day 180? Well, we want to see that they've like had this many more things, and then and then like what about day 270? And then like and then of course this is lined up around like we don't call them QBRs, we call them value delivery review
Nice.
meetings and presentations where you just come back and it's like, okay, here's the situation, but like everybody is lined up around the fact like what good looks like and what they should be doing. But I think a big thing that a lot of organizations don't have there is like, even if you have the opinion of how it ought to be used, how do you instrument that? And not just instrument it from like an amplitude standpoint, like a mixed panel or whatever standpoint, but like get it to the CXer.
Yeah.
Right. Get it to the salesperson.
I mean, there's so much in there, by the way. We could talk for an hour about what you just talked about, but just kind of reinforce a few things that you said that I think are super important for people watching. If you ask me what's one of the biggest challenges in category creation, it's the fact that in the very beginning, you're like trying to do something new. And frankly, if you're honest, you don't really know how it should work either. You don't know how it ought to work, right? You don't know what the way to run a sales organization or run CS is. Like in 2013, we didn't know that. But eventually you learn, right? You learn from your customers, you learn from what's working, and a company's got to switch to a more opinionated model.
Yes.
Early on, yeah, for sure. Like, okay, meet people, try different things. You've
kind of
got
like the Jello like sets.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
It's still a little wobbly. It's not liquid. It's still a little wobbly, but it's like set.
And if I said, what are some things you wish you'd done sooner? I wish we had done that more opinionated version sooner. And I think you're totally right that it starts with, okay, what are we seeing customers doing? What is the right way to do it? How should it ought to work? You encode that in best practices. We've taken that super seriously. So we have something called O2, which is this, it's called operationalizing outcomes. And it's a framework for running a CS team.
I like it.
Exceptionally detailed, like literally, how do you run a weekly risk meeting? How do you run an onboarding? How do you run a QBR? And like all the specifics, not just of how to use Gainsight.
Is this available on Gainsight's site? Because I think I want to read this.
It's funny. It's actually right. It's interesting. This is another thing that like I'll send you the link. We have it on a Coda. Coda is a cool like low code site.
Oh, yeah.
On there, and we're gonna make it more part of the Gainsight site and all that over time. And so part of it to create this methodology, and y'all have to agree. You have to meet up, and sales, CS services agree. And then you want to put it back into the product development process, Pete, like you said. So then it's actually the way you build stuff is around this. And so that journey of being more opinionated requires you to really listen to customers, come up with opinion, and then frankly, be a little brave. Because, it's easier to say, oh yeah, we'll do whatever you want. Like,
yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, you could tell our sales managers, well,
yeah,
sure,
I'll just walk over to engineering. They'll build it.
But it's very kind of like, honestly, as a customer, it's demoralizing when you go to a vendor that's supposed to be an expert and they're like, how should this work? And they're like, I don't know. How do you want it to work? And that's not it's not useful. Your job as a vendor isn't just building a product. It's being an expert. It's being an expert in what you do. And you should own that.
I love it. Well, Nick, unfortunately, we're out of time. This is absolutely fantastic. I appreciate you. Yeah, super, super awesome. What a crazy time that we live in where, that the advent of subscription is now, the advent of subscription 20 years ago is like now only kind of coming to full realization in how revenue organizations work together and kind of like the tool chain associated with it, whether it's like, a customer success platform or the kind of next implications of that around, product analytics that then can become operationalized for the CXers, for the AEs, for whatever. And then of course, specific software and tooling to facilitate that kind of that community. right? The single table
Right,
in your,
exactly.
single table in your community software. So Nick, thank you very much. Angelica is going to hop on here next and let us know who everybody's going to be hearing from next. I really appreciate everybody coming to join us, and I hope they're having a great time at our the MSP RevEx Fest. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Nick and Pete, for that amazing fireside chat. I'm back to welcome the next event on our agenda, Design to Win, Sales, Excellent Playbooks, and Scale with the CEO of Winning by Design. So we'll see you there.